Thanks for being here this late in the day. I do work at Esri, and I'm in a session about theory, and I'm not lost. This is on purpose. Just a side note, there are a lot of people at Esri who are really cool and love to talk about theory, so, oops, don't look at that. All right, so my name is Sarabelle, and every presentation I've ever done at NACIS has been about mapping software that I work on, or a technique I want to share about data visualization. And this one is different. From the previous speakers, I feel like I'm in the right crowd to do this, but I hope you don't mind if I talk about ideas this time. I want to take a step back and look at ourselves as cartographers. So, like a lot of professions, the technological advancements in GIS and cartography and access to those developments have made it easier for non-experts to engage in practices that have been traditionally controlled by the experts. And as cartographers, we handle this in various ways. So I want to celebrate the role of amateurs in cartography. And in doing so, I'm going to highlight the important role of experts, but also how cultivating a space for non-experts is also imperative. How's the volume? I don't know how close. How about here? Good? Yeah. All right. I don't want to make you all go deaf. Okay, so here's how the talk is going to work. I will introduce these three individuals with whom I had discussions, with whom I spent some time discussing the space of this role of non-experts during separate informal interviews. And then I'll highlight concepts that emerged from these discussions, as well as from some research before and after these interviews. And then I'll present an integration of those concepts as I tell you about the conversations. So, really quick, Justin Mazzell is a designer and an illustrator, and I met Justin while I was doing Adobe Live in San Francisco. Amber Boss, who couldn't be here this year, but she's a cartographer and a researcher, and she's also a PhD candidate from the University of Kentucky. And Adam Wilbert, who also couldn't be here, I think he's watching the live stream, so everybody say hi to Adam. He is a cartographer, and he's a Lynda author and instructor as well. I may pull a Marco Rubio in a minute and grab some water. No? Okay. So these are the four concepts that reinforce the discussion. The beginner's mind, maps are language and power, evolution, and feedback. So let's define these concepts. For the first one, I'm using the term beginners in beginner's mind, but I also mean novices and non-experts and anyone who's making a map but doesn't claim to be an expert. And I consider you all in this room an expert. So in Zen Buddhism, there's a philosophy known as the beginner's mind. And to be honest with you all, I'm a beginner at learning about the concept of the beginner's mind. So I went on social media, Facebook, and I said, hey, are there any experts who I can talk to on the beginner's mind? And Alan pointed out to me that it's an ironic conundrum to be an expert on the beginner's mind. So let's find out why. So this philosophy approaches the beginner's mind as an aspiration. And I see this quote by Zen Master Suzuki a lot, which says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the expert's mind, there are few. So it comes from the idea that as we become experts in any field, we're going to learn the rules and the language and the boundaries within which to participate. Thank you. Thank you. And as we become more comfortable with those boundaries, the possibilities might not seem as endless as when we were novices. So cultivating a beginner's mind, especially as an expert, it's at the heart of this philosophy. Awesome. Okay, so the second concept is maps are language and power. And this is something that we acknowledge as cartographers. At least we can acknowledge that there's a body of literature that says this in our field. Mapping is a contextualizing act of power. As experts, you all know how to employ the use of symbology to make a powerful text. But most people can read maps, few people actually make them, and even far fewer are actually trained in making maps. So as an expert, you speak a language that a lot of people understand, but few can speak expertly. So we can feel really good and empowered about that, but I think with that privilege comes responsibility. Welcome. Okay, so this is a frog I drew a few years ago, and the third concept is evolution. I think evolution is beautiful, and it's necessary for adaptation, and it's only possible because of mutations. A species can be content with all the biological acquisitions that their bodies have attained over the last thousands or millions of years. And then one day, one member of that species might emerge with a new biological expression that's a little different from the rest, like fur. And so this fur is going to allow her to survive more winters, and so she'll have more offspring, and to whom she will pass on her genes, and then eventually emerges a new furry species. So this is a simplified version of evolution, but the point remains that newness and adaptation are necessary for a species advancement. Okay, so cartography has these moments of mutations as well, and I'm saying mutations is a good thing. Maps today don't look like the maps of the 1400s. Beautiful map. A lot of cartography's mutations comes from the field adapting to new knowledge. We know what the coasts of North America look like now, and current day maps reflect this. But cartography has also changed not just because of the growing body of knowledge, but also because of the people who participate in the field. So here are 4 pivotal moments of geodata visualization and cartography. And not all 4 of these moments' creators even considered themselves to be cartographers, yet they still contributed to the evolution of cartography. And in some cases, it wasn't what they were doing. It wasn't just what they were doing, but it was also who they were when they were doing it, because they opened the doors for others by just simply participating. More water. And finally, the concept of feedback. It's that it's a loop where the hope is for everyone to arrive at new knowledge. So now with the concepts defined, I want to share with you some insights from the 3 individuals that I interviewed, where you're going to see the concepts we just defined emerge. And we're going to start with the concept of beginners. And to do so, I'll talk about my interview with Justin Mazel. Justin is not a beginner at his craft. In fact, I spoke with Justin because he's a well-established designer who comes to the defense of new designers who are willing to put their work out there into the world. Because of what Justin calls the democratization of design, where a lot of people have access to design tools, he's seen a small group also emerge, parallel to this, of purists, and let's call them gatekeepers of quote, good design, by offering unsolicited and public scathing critique of a new person's design just because of some simple rules they might be breaking. So this makes me think of a small part of my job where people ask me to review their maps and tell them what can be improved. And it's very exciting and humbling to be trusted with this type of task. A lot of times these maps are committing the same common cartographic mishaps. So what I do is I check off a list of the low-hanging fruit. It's the stuff that we all learn in our cartography classes. And when I give the customer back their map with all these corrections, they're happy. I did exactly what they asked for, but I didn't do much in way of moving cartography forward. I performed a task that was important to the outcome of this map by tapping into my expertise and learning experience and, training. And I had fun doing it. It's not advancing. There we go. So Justin Mazel points out that instead of advancing the world of graphic design, a public scathing critique of a novice's mistakes is likely to discourage people new to design from sharing their work. He sees it as sort of the critic's way of rhetorically pointing out that they know how to identify good and bad design, which we should assume if they're an expert, so. So that leads me to a question for you all. I don't have an answer to it, but I would like to ask it. What are the implications of an unsolicited public critique of a novice's low-hanging fruit or rule breaking? Do we potentially miss out on something? So I feel like I'm going to get pushed back on this. So of course, identifying a map's areas of poor design, it's an effective learning tool. And in map critique and feedback, it's an important part of advancing cartography. And showing things like before and afters of where cartographic standards were applied, it's really good learning experience. But I'm going to borrow from Justin when it comes to his philosophy of critique and feedback, when he says, try to be the designer that you wish you could have met when you were new. And I think for cartography, that means, yes, share the best practices and the theory, because that's important when people are hungry for it. But also engage with the mapper. What are they trying to say with their map? And could you, as the expert, learn from the non-expert with this type of engagement. Okay, moving on to maps are language and power. So the reason I wanted to talk with someone like Amber Boss about this is because of her work in participatory action mapping. Amber says that she thinks not just about how the map looks in terms of its aesthetic and cartographic best practices, but she thinks of maps as an agency of bringing people to the table. And she also tries to think about the table itself and who has the right to sit at that table. In her article on participatory action mapping, she writes about her mapping collaboration project with the Westside Atlanta Land Trust, which is a community mapping project that mapped housing inequality in one of Atlanta's neighborhoods. So Amber built an updatable map that Westside residents could update with data points and information. And during her interviews with these folks afterwards, they told her that they didn't even realize how bad some of the conditions were in their neighborhood until they started adding qualitative information to the houses in the geodatabase. So this is an aside, I just think about that. Like, they become way more intimately familiar with their own geography by participating in the mapping process. And I don't want to steal that from anybody. So, with these maps, Westside residents were able to effect real policy improvements by allowing the maps to speak for them at meetings where officials from the city, EPA, and HUD would be. So whether or not these maps adhered to all the cartographic best practices and standards, these maps were part of their spatial truth that we experts were not capturing. And even beyond this project, Amber's research has identified a lot of maps that break all sorts of rules, but still are very effective to the people who live there. So that's me. I used to be a firefighter. Of course, we have standards for a reason, and cartographic rules are very important for this. In some cases, maps can be life-saving tools. This is a morning briefing of a map on wildfires. This is what they do every morning. There's people working all night making maps on the fly for this. And fortunately for all of us, there are people doing crucial research to identify empirical methods that make maps more legible and comprehensible, and every cartographer should pursue this vital knowledge. But we cartographers break rules all the time, and experts don't receive as much pushback when they bend and break the rules as a novice would. Defined rules help us get creative within them, but I think it's also essential to ask the question, are there important spatial truths that we miss if we dismiss a map because it violates cartography standards in a non-expert way? Okay. A couple of text-heavy slides coming up. It's about to get radical. Okay. Only a few people got to make maps, and they were carefully guarded, and they were not participatory. This is a quote by Marie Price, who is the current president of the American Geographical Society, and she's the first woman president in the Society's 167-year history. It comes from an article written by Sarah Holder last March called "Who Maps the World?" Sorry, it's text-heavy. We're all aware that the history of cartography hasn't captured all the spatial realities of everyone. And in part, it's due to an implicit qualification about who has the expertise to make maps as discourse in the greater conversation and the balance of power. So we all know that. The field of cartography is now explicitly aware, there's literature on this, that making maps can be an act of power. So if we don't continue to evolve our openness about those who are participating in mapping, it is an act of aggression. So this is a quote by me, and it sounds so radical, maybe not to this room. I'm pleasantly surprised, but I don't think it's radical at all, because now that we are acknowledging map making is a contextualizing act of power, sometimes at the expense of others, what else can we call it? Okay, so don't worry. This is another thing, pushback I get when I practice this with my friends. Allowing for mapping novices will not erase the need for experts. In fact, our engagement as experts is crucial because of what we provide to the feedback loop. Since we acknowledge, I don't even know how to say this, but we acknowledge it now. What if we had an intentional way to approach maps made by novices something that we put in our skill set, just like we understand projections. Could we benefit cartography by engaging with novice maps like this? And that brings us to feedback. Oh, time to get up. All right. Adam Wilbert and I both live in Bellingham, Washington, and so I got to interview him in person. He's a great person. I really enjoyed our conversation, and Adam is a true believer in a productive feedback platform. He points out that cartography is so open to multiple disciplines. It's all the stuff we started in before we discovered how awesome cartography is, but it's also the stuff that we map. We map different things. And since cartography is this confluence of backgrounds, with it can come a lot of approaches. And because of this, we can be lifelong cartographers and still not be experts in all aspects of cartography. And many of us are cartographers for this reason. We can share our sub-expertise while still having the constant promise of learning. In terms of the cartography feedback loop, Adam recognizes this diversity of professional backgrounds as a benefit. In a good feedback loop, both the giver and the receiver of feedback will learn. And I really appreciated Adam's comment when he said, fostering this type of feedback loop is being a good steward of your profession. It's pretty straightforward that as a receiver of feedback, you're there to get information, but this is also the first step for the giver of feedback as well. A productive feedback loop is one where everyone is willing to learn. Okay, so I had this whole thing on this slide to say about how critical cartography has taken us a long ways, but I'm just going to dive into it. When a novice takes a map, takes a chance on map making, this is a crucial moment for us, I think, as cartographers. Our training and experience, it gets us so far. But we've also advanced as a field because of radical rule breaking, pushing the barriers of how to visualize spatial data. Your sincere engagement with a novice mapper potentially gives them and you the chance to arrive at new cartographic approach to understanding and presenting geospatial data. Okay, this is the last slide where I want to thank you all for letting me not talk about technology, but to talk about ideas, and I promise next year I'll return to the tech. All right.
We do have time for questions.
So many, I don't know who to pick.
Do you have an example of a time that you have done this?
I've done what?
Been open to a novice and learn something from it?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And that's how this whole talk was gonna go. I was gonna go find some maps that we can learn from that are made by novices. I mentioned Justin Mazel and Adobe Live that I did, and Adobe Live is this thing where artists go to San Francisco and share on a webcast, and people can, I share how to make maps in Illustrator. That's what I did. And there's a competition every day, and I gave everybody a pre-cooked map of the world made with natural earth data, and they were supposed to design it during my talk and then give it back to me, and I picked the one, I hate that, but I had to pick live which one I liked best. But anyways, I was really inspired by those because they were making a map not like a cartographer at all. They were making maps based on their personal geography, beautiful because they're designers. I don't want to say that that's not a map. I don't want to say you can't make pretty things for the rest of your life and then it doesn't count. But anyways, that's just one example. Good question. Right.
Any more? We have one back in the corner.
Thanks. Even with a dry mouth.
My question is, so as someone who works in Esri and thinking about how sometimes technology is a barrier for beginners to get past, especially in a profession like ours,
Sure.
how can someone, a group of passionate people at Esri help open up technologies to beginners?
Well, I didn't participate in it, but there was the MOOC, which I believe was free. So there was that, and also Esri is doing a lot more. First of all, I should professionally say that this talk is not a Esri sanctioned talk. So, but we're doing a lot more open data, open software. I work for Maps for Creative Cloud. It's free. Everybody can go download it right now if they want to. So I guess, I work remotely too, so I'm kind of like, you know, actually, Madura, if you want to speak with her, she works at Esri in campus, and she's a very knowledgeable technologist. Yes.
Summarize for that.
Yeah. So for people who didn't hear that on the live stream, story maps are another way of engaging in free software. In fact, I went to the what was the conference in Portland called last year? What was that called? No. It was. Anyways, it was Resistance GIS is what it was called. Oh, 2 years ago, Resistance GIS, and a lot of people were, these grassroots organizers using Esri story maps because they were easily accessible. So. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.